All right, go for it.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, wherever in the world you are. It's V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live. It's that monthly time again where we have one of our favorite guests show up. His name is Charles Hugh Smith of Two Minds blog. You should know him by now, and if you don't know, you've been living under a rock somewhere in the hermit kingdom of North Korea. Charles is one of the best thinking minds when it comes to market solutions and is a person who is really solutions oriented. His analytical mind has been fantastic. You can read his articles on Two Minds blog as well as Zero Hedge, and now he recently over at Rogue Money. We love to promote his work and love to promote his ideas because his ideas are certainly in line with us and fits the entire rogue and going rogue motif that we espouse here, and most importantly, self-empowerment, which is what Charles is all about. Excuse me, gentlemen, as my dark roast levels are running low. But anyway, without further ado, Charles Hugh Smith, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm very good, V. Thank you very much for having me on the program again.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Charles. I just had to have you back on. And today's was one of those wonky days. I've had a million and one technical issues and technical problems, but I am mustering through it. And I am a bit of an operating system agnostic, so I have just about every operating system known to mankind: Linux, OS X, iOS, Android, Windows, you name it. And today, everything, no matter where I turned, was giving me a problem. So I don't know if it's a coincidence, but to have that amount of redundancies fail on me is more than just a coincidence. I find it to be very strange indeed.
Right, because usually we can just count on Mickey Soft failing.
Yep, usually Mickeysoft is anybody who has Mickeysoft or played with Mickeysoft long enough will understand that having a Microsoft product is equivalent to walking in a dark room while being punched from multiple angles. Every time, I always tell people, yeah, Windows is great. Just don't connect it to the internet. As long as no one touches it, it's fantastic. Oh man, how's everything with you, Charles?
Good, good. And the thing about technology is that a lot of what we're looking for in the way of solutions does rely on technology. And this is, of course, the foundation of a lot of people saying, well, once there's an air blast nuclear device set off, or there's a solar flare, then all the things you guys talk about are all going to be gone. And of course, there could be a major impact, but we kind of, I think we both go with the idea that we use technology to leverage solutions. And so, it's not like we've forgotten about the real world, but if technology offers solutions in terms of community and cryptocurrencies and things like that, well, we're going to go ahead and embrace that, and then we'll deal with the nuclear war and all that if and when it happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we can't really plan for that, contingency. So
yeah. Exactly correct. And I doubt that there's going to be that. I mean, there's a lot of people who prognosticate that's going to very well happen. I don't see it. I think we've gone past the point of no return in terms of WW3 not happening. But that is not to say that regional conflicts will not occur, and that is not to say that paradigms will be altered and shattered and whatnot. So with that in mind, it's always a good thing to be prepared.
Right. Well, where do you want to start today?
Let's talk about what really is inside of a Twinkie. That's one of the topics that CJ has sent me, and I don't know what I think this has to do with survival, because it seems that Twinkies can survive. It's one of those food items or food simulations that can survive a nuclear winter. And we're trying to figure out exactly what it's made out of. All kidding aside, Charles, the Steam It model of cryptocurrency being generated to pay content creators. Now, this is something that we've talked about a dozen times here. Cryptos for creatives, so to speak. What are the options for creating cryptos other than mining for specific purposes, such as paying for content and whatnot? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think yeah, you guys have often discussed it, and it's a model that I think it's early days, but things like Steemit are showing us that we don't have to have only the blockchain, the Bitcoin model. Like for instance, when Greece was nailed by the Eurozone mucky mucks and its economy was essentially destroyed, right? Then they turn to like local currencies, right? And that's something that's often popped up, in depressions and periods where there's just a shortage of currency, right? Somebody comes up with a local currency, or they call it script. And so it's like, why can't we create cryptos that come into existence to serve a local community?
Sure.
And you can say, well, they're not as secure as a blockchain or something, but who's going to bother hacking like a village currency? I mean, exactly, what are you going to get out of it? It's actually a localized thing, but again, it's a point where technology could leverage this kind of thing and make it easier to use. I just saw a statistic somewhere that in African nations that aren't well served by global banks, I mean, 3/4 of everybody has a smartphone, so they can access
Yeah.
cryptos. And so, technology is actually superior to running around trying to print local money. So I think there's a lot of potential in things like that.
I mean, speaking of African countries, I mean, recently we've had the incredible genius and the creative abilities of Robert Mugabe, an individual who has proven to the world that he can definitely beat out the Weimar Republic in terms of inflation. We never thought we would see anything that would surpass the Weimar Republic, and Robert Mugabe has proved us all wrong, Charles. He has been deposed. We all know, anybody who's been following the news that is flowing out of Zimbabwe would understand that Zimbabwe is huge on cryptos as well as gold and silver. So it provides a very good hotbed as to how economies and markets are functioning there. Bitcoin, as you know, is around $13,000 to $14,000 per Bitcoin in terms of premium over there. But the fact is that cryptocurrencies are making an inroads in places like Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in places like Greece. What say you with the recent developments of how the black market is figuring out, and how basically the market itself is figuring out solutions that in which a central bank simply cannot compete?
Right. And again, one of the key things is mobile phones
Yeah.
are now so cheap that even people who with very low incomes can afford one. I'm just looking at a statistic here that the top mobile phone vendor in Africa sold 50 million units in the first half of 2017. That's a
Wow. And
run rate of
who
100 million.
Charles, who's that vendor? Do you know the name of that company?
It says it's Transion, TRANSSION, and they're news to me. But I mean, so in other words, they're selling 100 million phones a year in Africa. That means 100 million more people have access to
Yeah.
cryptocurrencies, right? And
Guess what? It's a Chinese company.
oh, is it?
Yep, Transient.
Wow. There
Hmm.
you go.
And here it is. China's transient phones find success in Africa. Shenzhen, which is basically makes Silicon Valley look like a backwater somewhere in Timbuktu, West Alabama. Shenzhen, no offense to any Alabamans out there, but Shenzhen. Few Chinese have heard. Actually, Shenzhen makes Silicon Valley look like Kabul, Afghanistan. I mean, seriously, Charles, you and I could design a phone in the morning, put it out for demo, or have a demo model request put out there by 12 p.m. lunchtime, and and before we leave for work, leave for home at the end of business by 5 o'clock, we'll have a working model all set and ready. There's nothing in the United States that even comes close in terms of efficiency. Nothing.
Right. And this is like the commoditization of the
Yeah.
supply chain. In other words, like after you design it and you get the fab uh,
Hmm.
this afternoon, then 10,000 units can be shipped next week, right? Because all the chips and components
Absolutely.
are laying around, and then
Oh.
you just plastic inject mold the form factor, and away you go.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing, right? Now, Transient, okay, has 100 million users in Africa alone. Its factories have a total production capacity of 300,000 phones per day.
Oh gosh.
Unbelievable. The vice president of Transient is Arif Chowdhury, is an Indian fellow. A decade ago, the sales were less than 1 million, mainly in India and Bangladesh. Transient became successful only when it put almost all of its attention on the African market. I mean, talk about striking the iron when it's hot, man.
Right.
Unreal.
And this has they of the 50 million units they sold in the first half, 11 million are smartphones, meaning large screen,
Yeah.
multiple SIM slots, cameras. I mean, there you go. And so that's exciting for those of us that are looking at decentralized finance. And this kind of ties in with another article I saw, maybe you did too, on Bloomberg about there's a large African immigrant population in France and in Paris, right? So what do they do when they want to send money home?
Bitcoin.
It's Bitcoin.
But but
And
but
yeah,
but I thought Bitcoin is just hype. I thought it was just it doesn't work. I thought it's just a fad.
yeah. And Jamie Dimon said it was only for criminals, and it was a
Ah,
Ponzi scheme.
right.
And so, how many banks do you think Jamie Dimon has in Africa that are functioning? Probably zero.
Probably zero.
Yeah, and so he's really annoyed, no doubt, that that he's cut out, right? Because they don't
Hmm.
need Jamie Dimon in
Yeah.
Africa.
Exactly. Because whatever we do in Africa is either I mean the West has a horrible track record in Africa, man. It's really bad.
Right, right. And so then you combine Western interference and the overhang of colonialism with homegrown dictators like Mugabe, and then you get a real mess. But this way, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, there's so much doom and gloom in the world, and you go, wait a minute. Here we have a way for people who are making relatively big bucks in the West to send money home that's secure, can't be stolen by the government, and isn't going to lose half its value by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
fact, it might, they'll probably make money if in the week.
Yeah.
So that's tremendous news. And with this, so you combine these two trends we're talking about: super cheap cell phones, and then advent of cryptocurrencies to exchange money. Um, it's a winner.
It's tremendous, man. And I'm looking at everything right now. Like you look at smartphone manufacturers, you have Apple. I mean, let's be honest here. iOS is a tearfully boring operating system, and with the advent of the new iPhone X, I think they've killed much of their user experience because they're making you do all these weird gestures and swipes when it could be all be solved with the simplicity of a home button. Apple is a one-trick pony. Their entire company is floated on one SKU. Now, what's going to happen when the number two manufacturer of phones? I thought it was Samsung, but actually is Oppo. I'm getting some feedback. CJ, is that you, man?
I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of like sound in the background. It's weird.
Charles, you're not
Charles
doing
is
a call on the ocean, are you? Charles, are you at the ocean?
No,
Charles.
I don't hear anything.
Interesting.
Okay, it's gone
Yeah,
now.
you know what? All the technical weirdness that's been happening today, like let's just roll with it. But yeah, the number two operating profit share right now is a Chinese manufacturer called Oppo. Oppo's the number two, and who's number three? It's a Chinese manufacturer named Huawei. Well, who's number four? That's a Chinese manufacturer named Vivo Smart. Who's number five? Well, it's another Chinese phone manufacturer called Xiaomi or Xiaomi. So unbelievable, man! How the things have changed. It's we're not leading much anymore. It's unreal.
Right, right. And so then that calls to my mind, where's the competitive advantage going forward on a national basis? And you go, well, it's blockchains and cryptocurrencies beyond the blockchain, the kind of thing we were talking about before. And so whoever can innovate there and get some encouragement and support from their government, like, i.e., this is okay, we approve all this stuff, go for it, guys and gals, they're going to have a competitive advantage because you know, the central China is a leader in a lot of things where they enable competition and innovation, but in a lot of things they want central government control, and so that's their Achilles heel, you know, and that's true of every government and every nation, right? Once you centralize control and have a bunch of well-paid bureaucrats worrying about losing control, then you end up stifling innovation and entrepreneurship dies, and so does your economy. So China's riding a bubble on certain innovations, and we'll have to see what they do with the whole cryptocurrency space.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, man. I definitely agree. You know, it's pretty funny. I mean, there's an old saying that a camel is a horse that's designed by a committee, and that is so true of what everything that the government puts out there. We see very carefully, very clearly, the disparity of wealth and in the soaring wealth inequality, Charles. The role of quantitative easing, fiat currency, these things that are happening with capital destruction. How do you think it's playing out right now that, you know, the world is becoming more consciously aware of cryptocurrencies, and they're starting to understand that, you know, what the central bank has is basically an inflexible jail cell, and a very, very you know, poor one at that. It's something that just traps you in and treats you very bad. It's kind of like Gersham's law: money goes where it's treated well. You know.
Right, right. And so that brings to mind two things that, you know, I'd like your commentary on too. Is you know, what are the central banks? What's their main job? Their main job is to create lots of new money for their buddies, right? The private banks and financiers, right? And so the money is created at the very top of the wealth power pyramid, right? Like, nobody gives us a checking account with a $50 million line of credit, right? If they did, hey, that'd be great, because then look what we could do with 50 million bucks at 1%. We could go buy a couple of apartment complexes. We could buy some silver mines. We could buy some, you know, oil rigs, et cetera, and start earning way more than the 1%. And so that's why we have so much wealth inequality, is the system is rigged. So the super wealthy have access to unlimited credit, so they can buy all the income producing assets out there. And so we have tremendous asset inflation, right? You get like really garbage, high risk loans. Bonds, right? Private, so-called junk bonds. And they've been soaring, you know, triple, quadruple, you know, they've gone through the roof. And it's all like, well, where do people get all this money to buy this junk bond stuff, right? And it's all like, well, it's just borrowed, you know, and they're borrowing it at very low rates, and then they're buying these high yield junk bonds, and then if they go bust, well, then they'll just go crying back to the government and say, "Oh, sorry, bail us out. We lost 100 billion." You know, so how does a regular person win in a system that's set up like that?
You can't, and that's the only solution is blockchain. Blockchain levels the playing field. Whether if you got, you know, $10 billion or $10, you are treated the same by the blockchain, and that's the beauty of it, man. I mean, there's no other way that the average person could possibly even compete, you know, with somebody who has $10 million or whatnot in capital. So the blockchain is the great equalizer, and rightfully so. Because when you create the blockchain, you prevent that vertical integration. And when you prevent vertical integration and centralized control, you prevent those who have the ability to pay for play from getting, you know, from having the winning hand. And therefore, and here's the other advantage I love. When you have a fair playing field, it's he who has the most creative ideas, he who has the most creative, efficient services that always wins, not the person who has access to favor, because that's currently what we have right now. We have he who has access to favor wins. He who has access to the printing press wins. And when we are, you know, utilizing something with the blockchain, putting it in the hands of the public, I like it, man. You know, I mean, look at how early banking history was in this country. I mean, depending on what state you were in, what region you're in, what counties, what banks were in those counties, everybody had like bank certificates, and you would trade those bank certificates. You know, I mean, it was a functioning economy before we had a centralized dollar. I mean, look at how it was from 1870 to 1912, the greatest economic boom in human history, the greatest amount of economic development in human history, and it's because everything's so decentralized. I mean, I love it. I mean, I mean, a return to Ether, and like for instance, I want to trade Ether. I want to give you some Ether for your Litecoin, then we swap for Bitcoin. That's how it was. This is the 21st century version of what was happening at the turn of the 19th century, Charles.
No, you're absolutely right, and I love your summary of what's corrupt about our system, which is it's not a level playing field. That those with access to political favors, they create the cartels, and then they cut out all competition, and then we end up with the higher education cartel and $100,000 colleges, and then we get the healthcare industry, and $25,000 for the office visit. And another 50,000 if you stub your toe and we need to put a Band-Aid on it. I mean, it's like this, all of this stuff could go away with blockchain type technology, because we could introduce real competition.
Yeah.
And that's really what's lacking when, as you say, the playing field has been completely jacked out of level. And it's interesting you spoke about the 19th century, because that the same situation, as far as I know, also occurred in like the early 1800s in America, where people were starved for cash and credit, and so yeah, the banks, it was like kind of a free for all.
And it was, and what happened in that type of environment, as soon as the government stepped in and started, having some sort of taxations, tariffs, this, that, and the other, there was capital flight. And then they had to back off. It's people have to understand, this is the greatest check and balance against government, is a completely decentralized system where the people could dictate which currency they want to use.
That's right. That's right. And the currencies can be issued, like I don't know if you heard this, like a lot of people, skeptics of the whole cryptocurrency blockchain field, I've had people tell me, well, look at Bitcoin's inflationary, because every time they do a hard fork, they double the number of coins, and it's all like, well, okay, that's a good point. I mean, something to think about, but is that really bad inflation, or how devastating is that compared to the inflation like Zimbabwe and Venezuela? You want to hold those currencies instead of Bitcoin?
Yeah, exactly correct, man, and that's the whole entire thing. Like, people. I mean, we're in a state of humanity where we shouldn't be trusting our government. You go east, people in China, people in many parts of Asia and in Southeast Asia, they don't trust their government. People wonder why people in the populations of those countries have a penchant for gold. Well, they have a penchant for gold because they've been through various inflationary periods. They've been through various currency busts and revaluations, all these things that we in the United States have never had to suffer through. So we've lulled ourselves. I can't even talk right now. Lulled ourselves into a normalcy bias, Charles.
That's an excellent point. And you spoke about capital flight, and I think that's a key factor that is unappreciated, right? I mean, people go, well, why is there a housing boom, bubble in like Toronto, Canada, and Vancouver, Canada? And everybody knows it's capital flight out of China, as wealthy people in China are trying to diversify their holdings. They don't want to hold only the yuan.
Right, exactly. They want to get into other markets. They want to get into hard assets, and again, what are they doing? Well, here's a great scheme that's available for a lot of these people that are foreign investors. They would go directly to something like a Wells Fargo, and what would happen is they'd go to Wells Fargo, and a lot of these institutional Chinese investors, they have on hand U.S. Treasury dollars, and they take those Treasury notes, okay, and they go to Wells Fargo, they put it on deposit. Wells Fargo will allow them to capitalize and give them a loan, 5 to 10 times leveraged out. at practically 0% interest rate next to, and they're able to go out and leverage that money in order to buy profits. There's no other investment money like that. That is the cheapest investment money you're going to get. And you want to get investment money, you're talking about 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 22% interest that's out there for certain investment dollars. So this is huge, and they're taking advantage of it. So and what are they buying? They're buying hard assets. They're getting real estate. They're getting things that the typical American has no concept of understanding or getting, or if they are, they're doing it. If just the average Joe is just not privy to this kind of stuff, Charles.
Right. And that's part of what the cryptocurrency space is, why it's so appealing to us regular folks is and of course the earlier you got in, the wealthier you've become, right? And so you could say, well, that's unfair, but it's like, hey, that was life. Somebody took a chance and was buying Bitcoin in 2011 or 12. Well, then they've reaped the rewards because there was no guarantee of anything, right? But what do you think about why is Bitcoin it's like they try to keep killing it and declaring it dead. It drops to 5,000 and then it's been written off and now it's 8,000. I mean, why does it keep appreciating?
It keeps appreciating for a wide variety of reasons. You got those who just want to hold on to it. They're like, nah, I just want to hold on to my crypto, and they don't want to spend it, and that it's going up. And then of course the demand of it. These are just one of the things. Like for instance, if it's not, there's no way when you look at the real technicals of Bitcoin, it's to say it's a bubble is to lackadaisically just write something off without really looking at it. Bitcoin is where it is because fiat currency is failing all around it. Bitcoin is where it's at because it has shown through the last 9 years now, that it is resilient. It's been through booms, it's been through busts, and people are willing to ride it out. People are willing to ride out the busts so they can take advantage of the booms, And I think most importantly, it's doing well because even the forks have people were commensurating that, oh, here we go, the fork, SegWit 1 is going to happen, and then Bitcoin, gold is going to happen, Bitcoin it's going to decimate Bitcoin, and that is not what you see here. Bitcoin has gotten more resilient, more advantageous, and more people are utilizing it now more than ever. And you have mainstream companies like Overstock.com and various other companies that are taking on Bitcoin. And if you have a Purse.io account, you can buy things on Amazon at a 20% discount on top of whatever price Amazon is charging for simply using Bitcoin to purchase the product. So it is a huge difference, man. It is an absolutely huge difference.
Right. And when you say that fiat currencies are failing, well, let's talk a little bit about that because I think we could probably say that fiat currencies are failing on multiple levels. And number one, of course, is inflation, meaning that they're losing purchasing power.
Yeah, huge.
And then we talk about Venezuela and Zimbabwe, and of course those are extreme examples. But I mean, I did a piece of like a year or so ago called the burrito index, where I was tracking like the cost of a burrito. And it's like up 160%, in a few years. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. We're told inflation's running at 1.5% a year.
Yeah, exactly correct.
For a decade?
Right.
Yeah. And so 1.5% a year. So in a decade, prices have only gone up 15%. What planet are the official, statisticians on? Because they're not on Earth. That's for darn sure. So anyways, that's a big failure. But that's only the beginning of fiat currency failure, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And it is just the beginning of it. And we're in the throes of it. People are wondering, where's the systemic collapse? It's happening all around. I mean, you look at the mainstream living, lively, dynamic economy that we're supposedly all be living in, and simply it's just not there. I mean, it's not there. I mean, have you seen anything fundamentally that is causing some rapid change here? No, it isn't. It's now people are saying, oh, there's more consumer exuberance. Well, what the heck does that mean? Okay, so you feel more better now. You can go out and wait in line for a new iPhone and then do a payment plan on it for the next 24 months. right? Because that's how people are buying it. They're not shelling out $1,000 up front. You know, I mean, what is it? What does this consumer exuberance mean? They're going to extend their credit even more. I don't see any wealth coming in. I don't see any meaningful job numbers. I mean, have you,
Right.
Charles? Because I haven't seen any of this. So
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think the thing about the capital flight and the fiat currency failures that we're kind of talking about, these are like early days for those trends, I think, and so right now, the vast majority of people go, well, the dollar and the euro and the yen and the yuan, they're all pretty sound. Yeah, they're losing some purchasing power every year, but it's not severe yet. It's not a crisis. But what we've learned in the past is crises appear kind of like in a phase shift, right? Like
right,
suddenly everything looks normal, and then a tsunami hits,
yeah,
essentially. And so I think that's part of why a lot of people with wealth are starting to get interested in cryptocurrencies because they're afraid of that tsunami. You know?
they are. They definitely are because they know that there's something wrong in the market. You have, I mean, well, I don't even know, 22,000 point Dow at this point. It's just nothing makes sense anymore. So why should they even hold their money in the, why should they even have their money in the market? Like, why? It's just, it's beyond me, and it's beyond most people. And most people who are savvy investors, they're going to ride up the stock market for all it's worth. But they're taking their winnings and they're putting it back into hard assets. They're putting it into cryptos. I mean, it's here to stay. And I think anybody who wants to denounce that or wish it away or poo-poo it at this stage of the game, Charles, because let's be honest here, this is not, 2008. This is a different world we're living in, and it's a dynamic world. It's a rapidly changing world. And I'm telling you, and you and I both know this, governments are going obsolete. They simply cannot stop what has been created, and they can't put that genie back in the bottle.
Right, right. And so let me ask you about a topic that I get a lot of email from crypto skeptics, which is fine. I mean, it's important to be skeptical of something, right? Especially before you invest your own hard-earned money in it, right? So
Yeah,
skepticism is always a good idea. And so what
yeah,
some people have told me, hey, look at cryptos like Bitcoin will crash in a financial crisis because some people will need to sell their Bitcoin to
right.
because they got margin calls on their stocks, or they got other loans that have been called, and that kind of thing, because that's what happens, right? People sell their best assets to try to save their worst assets. It's not a good financial decision, but that's how people think, like, oops, I got a
Well,
margin call.
let's just rephrase. Let's just rephrase what you just said. People sell their best assets to save their worst assets. No, what's happening is people sell their assets to save their liabilities. That's what they're doing. you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
And
because
so
none of yeah, they're not selling their best assets to save their worst. They're literally selling their best assets to save their liabilities.
right, right. And so and you go, well, why don't they just sell their stocks because that's what's tanking? But like you mentioned a bias. It's we have a bias against sucking up a big loss, right? We'd
Yeah,
rather sell something, and that's why gold got hit in 2008, right? People started selling their gold to
yeah,
cover their margin calls, and they should have sold their stocks and just eaten their losses. But it's human nature to resist taking that loss. But so the skeptic's point here is the transaction rate is so low on Bitcoin that if a bunch of people start trying to sell their Bitcoin, the market's going to collapse because there's just a bunch of sellers, and there's not a fast enough transaction rate for buyers to come in and save it from crashing. So
yeah,
that's one argument I've heard. What do you think of that?
yeah. No, it's. I mean, I, I mean, just look at it. It's exactly what's going on. It's exactly what's going on, and I just don't think people get it.
Yeah, and so I think the point is valid. Like, in other words, any asset that gets there's only sellers on and no buyers. Well, then
Right.
that's how you get crashes, because
Right.
nobody wants to buy the Dow at 22,000 anymore when it's in like dropping 1,000 points a day or whatever.
Right.
So, so the question that the skeptic was raising is there going to be any buyers of last resort in Bitcoin? You know, if it drops like
Yeah, of course.
$1,000. Yeah.
Well, and here's the beauty, and this is the problem. People are looking at cryptos like Bitcoin in the same way they would look at a stock. Oh, look, you know, Apple shares are, I don't know, a couple $100. I'm priced out of the market. Well, you can buy $20 worth of Bitcoin. It's still going to go up in value.
Right.
You know, that's the point number one. Number two, you know, there's still an opportunity to get on the ground floor of cryptos. I mean, look at Bitcoin Cash. I mean, Bitcoin Cash, what's that going for right now? Like $1,300, $1,200?
Yeah.
And that's a very good price point to get involved with. You know, Bitcoin Cash right now, it's going for $11.97. You know, and people like me who got into Bitcoin earlier, we're doing great because my Bitcoin portfolio between Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold is doing wonderful. But for those you want to get involved, you got 1187. Look, 1187.01 is the price for Bitcoin Cash right now. What's the price for gold? Gold spot. I say everything's changed so much. I'm not even looking at the spot price for gold. Spot price for gold right now, we're looking at
1280, right? Something like that.
1297, 1297.10 right now. That's current New York prices. So basically 1297. Okay, so if I have a choice of buying Bitcoin Cash at 1187 or gold at 1297, and this ain't investment advice here, but I kind of like where things are going with crypto, so I'm going to be moving to 1187. I'm going to pick up Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, which was $300 a month ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's talk about the hard forks, because that's another thing that the
I got something to say about that. Charles,
right
I'm going to make a statement. I think with all the regulations that are going to be coming down from governments and exchanges and all these other things, in regards to ICOs, I think right now, man, because we've gone ICO crazy, people are buying ICOs that don't make no sense on certain tokens that may have no merit, have no value. I think forks are going to be the next ICO.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think forks are going to be the next ICO. And I think, you know, I think it's, you know, just between Bitcoin, Bitcoin platform, you have the Ethereum platform, the various forks there, the various tokens that are there. Forks are going to be the next big thing. So, you know, let's see how it goes.
Right. And my comment on forks is I'm not a technical guy. I'm not going to be able to code a blockchain. Okay, so I'm just an interested amateur. But when I try to understand the development team behind, say, Bitcoin Cash, I see people who feel like they have a better solution than the legacy Bitcoin, and so they present it via a hard fork. And so if this happens because people are trying to present what they feel is a better solution, hey, isn't that what the market is supposed to do? And if the market disagrees and they find that solution that hard forked was not a good solution, then it will die on the vine. And if they favor it, then it will find its own market. So I don't see how hard forks, unless there was like one every 3 minutes or something. But I mean, an occasional hard fork, if it's well intended and well designed, hey, great, let the market sort it out.
Yeah, and this is the great big debate. Excuse me, with you know, people that are you know, Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin Classic, so to speak. Bitcoin Classic, the hoarders just wanted to hoard it; they don't want to use it, but that defeats the purpose of what even Satoshi Nakamoto wrote, and that is to make cash or make currency fungible, transactionable. You know, so you know, these are the things that are, you know, put out there, and people need to understand that you know, if you're just hoarding something, you're just not using it. So eventually split. So now you have Bitcoin Cash, BCH, and BTC. And Bitcoin Cash is all about, you know, putting Bitcoin in the hands of everybody, making it absolutely dirt cheap to transact in. with the lowest fees possible and the fastest speed possible as well. That's what we need to do, because I don't care about hoarding Bitcoin. I care about putting Bitcoin in the hands of everybody. If Bitcoin is hoarded, this is the problem. Look at that latest research that was done. What was it 97% of all the Bitcoin wallets, or the 97% of all the Bitcoins that are out there are held by like 4% of the wallets that are out there? You know,
Right.
something like that. Well, we don't want that. That's a problem. Now, if we're talking about socially changing the world, if we're talking about having a real social impact in this world, we're talking about taking the 6.3 billion people that are unbanked and underbanked. Well, you can't do it with 4% of the wallets controlling 97% of all the coin that's mined. That's a problem. You want to put this in the hands of every single person. You want to make sure that a toddler has access to this. You want to make sure an old man has access to this. And smartphones have changed the game. We can bring those people that are living in the darkness into the light and into the global economy of a decentralized trade and a decentralized commerce, which is a nightmare to the governmentals. It's a nightmare to the bureaucrats. And that's how we do it. So I'm in favor of Bitcoin Cash. I'm in favor of necessary, useful, functional, and utility-based forks that make it easier. Because that's the mission here. You know, everybody wants to play fanboy, Charles, and I think that's a dangerous thing to do right now in this stage of the game, the crypto markets. Is everybody wants to play a fanboy? Oh, I'm Bitcoin Classic. I'm the original Bitcoin holder. Oh, I'm Bitcoin Cat. No, let's get this out in the hands of many people as possible. Then we begin to change the world. Us hoarding cryptos slows down innovation, slows down adaptation, slows down the robustness and strength of the network and how it's able to grow. It delays many things, and all it does, it keeps empowering those who've been lording over us with their jackboots to our neck. It keeps those idiots in power, and that's the last thing we want, right?
Yeah, well said, well said. Because again, everybody, a lot of skeptics will say, well, cryptocurrencies have this problem and this issue, and and it boils down to me is, well, which system is guaranteed to collapse?
Correct.
The fiat currency issued by central banks, or all this messy, innovative world of cryptocurrencies? Well, they could both collapse, but the one I know that is guaranteed to collapse is the fiat currencies.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, which you're taking a chance with any kind of currency or any form of money or any kind of investment, right? Risk is always present. But it's like, the one thing I can guarantee you is the fiat currencies are the ones that are going to collapse, right? Because they're being printed and given to the top of the wealth power pyramid in vast sums, right? So if there's a cryptocurrency that's being issued and not being mined, like for instance, we were talking about a community-based crypto, if it's being issued in reasonably limited amounts, right, to fuel local commerce, like you said, decentralized commerce, a little bit of inflation isn't going to kill anybody, because basically people just need currency to transact. They just need something safe, right? And they're not worried about what the value is going to be in a year, because they're just trying to sell what they made this week, right? So, a concern about inflation for transactional cryptocurrencies, I don't think it's an issue unless it's created with such abandon that it's inflated, like the Bolivar or the Zimbabwe currency, But so I guess my point is, I see that there's, following your line of thinking here, that what we really want is decentralized commerce. There's room for like multiple layers of cryptocurrencies. In other words, the more the merrier, if you will, in like legitimate transactional cryptocurrencies. And so if you had a local crypto that you were using just to buy and sell stuff that you were making or buying food for the week, and you had some leftover stuff, well, then you can buy that. You can put that capital into a something like Bitcoin Cash, that has
Correct.
Yeah, and then so this is the ideal circumstance to me, is that there's multiple layers to move your capital between, depending on your needs.
Yep. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with that. You know, I agree wholeheartedly with that, and it's just it's the more the ability we have, and the more people have this, the better off we will all be, and that's the most important thing, man.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the core, and that's the core of my kind of book and thinking on the thing is if we create decentralized commerce opportunities for the 3 billion people
Yeah,
who are really poor still, they can't help but benefit, and it will benefit the developed world because then they'll have 3 billion more buyers for their cheap cell phones, for electrical generators, for solar panels, for all the stuff that's currently in over capacity in the
right,
developed world, right? There's too much of it. And
right.
so this is the hope, is decentralized commerce. So I'm totally with you.
1000%, man. 1000%. Charles, closing comments, man. What say you? What's on your radar? Go ahead.
Well, last thought is I put out a graph, like, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, that just was kind of for fun, showing Bitcoin going up, like, and then then
Sorry.
crashing 30% and being declared dead, and then going up again to a new high, being declared dead, going up to a new high, being declared dead. And so, it's if you're just an objective observer, you have to find it amusing that it's this pattern keeps repeating. New
Sure.
high in Bitcoin. Then it wavers and there's a mini crash, and then it's declared dead, and then you get a new high like 6 weeks later. So
Exactly.
um, it's certainly a very interesting time.
It definitely is. It definitely is. I think it's an exciting time to be alive. We're in the cusp and the forefront of watching this entire changeover of humanity. It's a change of commerce. It's a change of politics. It's a change of business as usual, and it's a change of consciousness all at the same time. I've never seen this type of a transition anywhere in human history where it's consciousness, it's economics, it's commerce, it's politics. Everything is rapidly changing at the same time, and I don't think it's coincidence.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate getting to discuss these big ideas with you guys.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Charles. Always a pleasure. With that being said, folks, Charles Hugh Smith, twomindsblog.com. And you can also find his work on Zero Hedge and as well as roguemoney.net. With that being said, I will hand it over to the Hispanic heartthrob CJ. Take it away.